Well, welcome to Crossvale's webinar series focused on automation with Ansible Tower. Today we'll examine compliance and auditability automation. I am Todd Millard, Chief Growth Officer at Crossvale, and with me is our Principal Architect, Brett Kugler. Today's event is going to be scheduled for about 45 minutes. And so if you're looking for solutions around automation, we feel like this time will be well spent based off of the content that we have in store for you today. A few housekeeping items to address. At first, everybody's microphone is muted. If you have any questions, please use the question and answer icon at the bottom of your screen. We'll address those questions in our question and answer session at the end. If we're unable to get to your question, we'll make sure we respond to you by email after the webinar. So today our agenda, first we're going to focus on a short introduction about Crossvale, just so you kind of know who we are. We'll talk a little bit about our Rethink automation in Ansible. Then we'll jump right into a demo to visualize automation at the command line and show you how a properly deployed automation strategy with Ansible Tower creates a framework to automate everything. Then we'll wrap up the demo with a really cool use case with Ansible Tower, Crossvale Launchpad, and ServiceNow ITSM to tie it all together to show you how you can really see the power of it all. And then finally, we'll show you how you can implement an automation strategy in about 4 weeks in your enterprise. At the end, we'll save about 10 minutes for a question and answer session. So please, if you have questions, use the question and answer down there and we can get to them near the end of the webinar. So who is Crossvale? We're an Apex partner with Red Hat. In 2020, we won the Leading Edge Award, and we're also the Application Platform Partner of the Year. So prior to that is when we won that award. Our Crossvale has also been helping clients for about 20 years getting more out of their enterprise applications and platforms. So we focus on everything from day zero, which is about the build and enablement part of it, of Red Hat platforms, to day one development of solutions. So like DevOps, integration solutions, automation, which is what we're talking about today, and then also native cloud native application development. And finally, our day two operations and maintenance. So we have managed services around many of the Red Hat platforms as well. And we actually have a prescriptive approach we're going to talk about today when it comes to automation and Ansible Tower. We are also a preferred Red Hat services partner for companies like Xenix, IBM, Dell, and Red Hat Professional Services. So this brings us to today's webinar. So, rethink automation is, our tagline here. And to me, what automation is really about is, there's a lot of bullets here that talks about a lot of different things about automation, but it really comes down to peace and better decision making. So a properly designed automation strategy reduces stress, simplifies your repeatable processes, and creates an easy to flow audit trail. This allows you to have more time and information to make better decisions, which results in continuous improvement. And that's what it really comes down to. How do we continuously improve our IT operations and our business? And that's what we're going to discuss today. So the solution we're going to discuss today is not limited to one area of the business. Once a proper foundation is put in place, which is like the Ansible Tower Launchpad that we're going to show you, it will grow into every area of your business. If it touches an IT system, it can be automated. Like just think about HR onboarding of a new employee. Like how many IT systems does that touch? So with this type of automation solution, you can automate that process across multiple different departments. And that's just one use case that's kind of outside of just, a normal IT use case. So also Ansible automates technologies you use. Here's a small list of just some of the technologies. Where Ansible's power really comes from is the modules that's written by the community and by vendors. And so there's many thousands of modules out there that are already written and maintained, but also you can create your own modules. And so the flexibility is limitless. And then Ansible is an automation platform that sits above all your other automation teams. So it connects teams across many areas of the business with just one unified platform. And that is a very powerful part of how Ansible is so key to an enterprise's strategy for automation. And that brings us to the demo part of our webinar. So I would like to introduce our principal architect, Brett Kugler, to take it from here. Brett.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Todd. Really appreciate it. Thanks for everybody for joining. Hopefully you will get something valuable out of this particular demonstration. I do want to, let's go back here for just a second. There we go. So we're going to talk about the exciting world of compliance and auditability, right? And that's being a little bit facetious. The idea that compliance, audit controls, all of those things, they tend to be very burdensome and very manual labor intensive. And so that drudgery when it comes to, you know, audit time and compliance time, it's about having to prove that your systems are in a certain state. And that can be very complex if you have many different solutions in your environment and you need to go account for all of them, right? So for the purposes of today, we're going to be using an OpenShift cluster just to do a demonstration. However, this can be extended to, like Todd was saying, to just about any system in your environment. Anything that has an API or a CLI or SSH access, generally, you know, those are the three control mechanisms that Ansible uses. But this is a little bit of a different use case for Ansible, right? Normally we consider Ansible to be an automation platform to do things like server provisioning or config management and that sort of stuff. This is really more about building a track record of changes in the system, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to start off, and I'll just show you our OpenShift cluster. It's essentially a brand new cluster. And we'll play through this in just a second. Sorry. Right at the end of that, there we go. All right. So let's log into our cluster here and take a quick tour just so you can kind of see what is going on behind the scenes. And there we go. The demo video gods are not being cooperative. So essentially, the whole point here is I can log in as an administrative user, right? Or I could log in as just a user on the system. And given enough power and control within the cluster, I can go and make changes, right? So like I mentioned, this is a brand new cluster. It was stood up, rolled out via automation. It's a pretty small, it's a demo cluster, right? So it's 3 masters and 2 workers. This is important because we're going to be seeing these nodes down the road a little bit, just to make sure that, you know, we're doing apples to apples here, and what I'm showing you is all the same stuff, right? So in this case, we have our cluster operators, everything's running, everything's in good shape, right? So we have one project that we've created. It will be down here at the bottom. It's our testing project. And we're gonna do some playing around with this. We also have a single user on the system, which is my user. And so we're going to go and be a little destructive, right? We're going to go ahead and delete this test project, this testing project. And just for grins, we'll go and delete my user as well, right? So here's an example of having somebody on a platform making changes just kind of willy-nilly because they can, right? This happens a lot. And it can, you know, lead to all sorts of issues. Mistakes happen. People, it's not always malicious, all right? And so we have to figure out a way to guard against these types of activities, right? We can't control everything necessarily, but we can build an environment that protects us from those types of situations. So just a couple of points here that I want to point out before we go into the next segment. We're controlling the OpenShift cluster via API. So the interesting thing, if you have a little bit of knowledge of Ansible and how it works, generally you have a list of inventory systems that you're controlling. You have to pass that list to Ansible and it does work against them. In this case, we're not taking that approach. Cluster management is going to be done completely through the OpenShift API. And we're basically using the K8s module in Ansible to facilitate that. And a good reason for that is, like with OpenShift 4, since you're running on Core OS, those servers, the underlying operating system, doesn't really need a whole lot of maintenance and management from the server config type perspective, right? So again, this is why we're accessing it to the API and not really worrying about the servers themselves. So why use Ansible and not just the OC command line tool, right? OpenShift's CLI tool? Well, the answer there is repeatability and scalability, right? So as we step through this next demonstration, I'll be kind of really talking about how all of that works together in order to kind of build a foundation that we can grow into and kind of expand, right? So we're right down into the nitty gritty, and we're going to just run some sample Ansible playbooks here. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the machines. No, I take that back. The first thing we're going to do is log into the OpenShift cluster, right? So this is a nice example of, if you don't have the right permissions set up, then even if you have access to the automation, you can't run it, right? So we need to still make sure that as we move through these processes, everything is secured behind proper access methods. So here we've gone and we've run this simple playbook. All it does is go and request the node list from the OpenShift cluster. Here we can see we have the 3 masters and the 2 workers. Okay, so very simple, right? But what we've done is we've actually gone out and we've gathered information from the cluster. We now know things about the cluster that we necessarily didn't before, right? And there's all sorts of good information that you can pull from the cluster. And we'll talk a lot more about that in a little bit. But for now, we're going to go back to this idea of namespaces and users, right? So you saw me go into the OpenShift console and delete the namespace and delete the user. So now we're going to go and redo that through the Ansible playbook. So it's parameter driven, tell it the user that we want, and then we tell it the state we want it to be in. So this is really important because this makes it easy to toggle whether it's there or not. The terminology is present or absent, right? So I've requested the state of this user to be present, and through the UI, or I'm sorry, through the API, Ansible has now created this user in OpenShift. Now, an interesting catch here is that just creating the user isn't good enough, right? It's good enough for you to log into, but there's this concept of an identity in OpenShift. And the identity doesn't actually get created until a user logs into the cluster for the first time, right? So that's an interesting piece, because when we're looking at automation, now we have to say, okay, when we create a user, it's pretty simple. All we have to do is create the user, right? However, and here we see that the identity has been created. However, if we choose to delete the user, now we have 2 things to clean up. we have to clean up the user record that we that we created, right? But we also have to clean up that identity that got created when the user logged into the cluster, right? So this is one of those things where things are happening that are not necessarily obvious. And we have to pay close attention to these artifacts and what get generated and how we remove them, right? So there's an extra step in the process of the removal of the removal of the user where we also remove that identity. And here you can see that both of those things are missing. And if we go and look in the console, just to kind of prove that out, we would know that that those things are, or that user is now no longer there. So if, like, I obviously have to log back in as the administrative user. And then if we go check the users on the system, excuse me, we will see that they're not there, right? So that's just proving the point. So now let's take a look at the namespace, right? So we had created a testing namespace originally, then we deleted it from the console in OpenShift. So we're going to go ahead and create the namespace. Well, we'll recreate the user first, because what we're going to want to do is essentially go through the steps of creating the user, creating a namespace, and then giving role-based access controls to the user for that namespace. So all of those elements have to exist, right? So we'll create the user role here, and I'll quickly realize that I can't because I don't have a namespace for it yet. So I got to go create the namespace first. And again, you might be asking yourself, especially if you're familiar with OpenShift and using the OC command line tool, it's like, well, why go through all this effort? I could do the same thing with OC. And you'll see me kind of flopping back and forth between the Ansible playbooks and the OC, right, command line tool. And this is a really important point. When I'm running OC, all we can do is capture the moment, right? So once I hit enter on that OC, it's gone. And I have to retype it, right? And that's an interesting kind of difference, right? Because you might argue, well, you have to do the same thing with the playbook. If you create a command line executable like this and you type it in, then you have to retype that too if you want to do it. You see me doing this here kind of back and forth where I'm adding and removing, and I can just arrow up and change a variable and all of that, right? But the real interesting thing here is now that I have these playbooks, I can take those playbooks and I can use them, I can check them into source control, I can use them in Tower, and I can build a tool chain to do this work for me. And so I can get off the CLI. I don't have to remember all the esoteric commands, and this is self-documenting. The playbooks themselves describe the process. So that's really key here, and how we're going to grow out of our command line and grow into more of the automation processes, right? So just to kind of wrap things up here, we want to check. We don't have a role binding in here for a user yet. So I'm going to use the OC command line just to add a role to my user. And we'll just use the basic user role here. And we'll use that testing namespace, right? So if we look at the role bindings again, we'll see, okay, now there's this basic user role binding in that namespace because we've added my user. And now we're going to tear it all down. So this is actually a use case for Crossvale. And I'm sorry, Todd had mentioned at the start that for HR, you can use automation to control the addition and removal of users from all of your different systems, right? And this is really an example of that. And we do this internally at Crossvale for all of our onboarding and offboarding of employees. And it's not just OpenShift. It's Google, it's Slack, it's GitHub, it's all of our IT tooling that we use that we have to manage users in. We can use this if it's not connected, obviously, to our domain. We can use this process to help extend that, right? So again, spent kind of a lot of time kind of on the CLI, looking at playbooks and all of that. And this is a very important foundational setup for what's coming next. So what is next? If you saw our previous webinar, we said at the end of it, we would come in and offer you kind of this free assessment on your OpenShift cluster. And this is tooling that we've built to really enhance the service level and the time to evaluation of a potential managed services client for Crossvale. So we'll go in, we'll run our automation against an existing OpenShift cluster, and it essentially will tell us all sorts of things about that cluster. And we can make recommendations to the client saying, hey, these are the things where you're kind of out of compliance, or we think has been architected wrong, or whatever. And it really is a nice kind of compact view of a cluster. And so we're going to run through a quick demo of a pared down version of our assessment. And the reason for that is A, to save in runtime. We have limited time here, and B, to not necessarily give away all of our secrets right out of the box. So you're going to see us run this from the command line again. Now, we can run this from Tower as well, but we go to clients and we execute this in their environment. And not all clients have Tower. So we can run it in either case. But you see here, essentially, we have a directory with a single playbook, right? And this and some roles that are kind of squirreled away underneath the roles directory and all of that. But what we're going to do is we'll, again, have to log into our cluster, right? We need that OC login. And again, we can do this through Ansible, especially in Tower with managed credentials. We'll look at that in a little bit. But from here, all we do is run this assessment playbook. And what this is going to do is it's going to go out and it's going to gather a ton of information via the K8's info module from your cluster. We're going to look at nodes. We're going to look at cluster operators. We're going to look at namespaces, pods. We're going to look at your etcd configuration. We're going to look at the OCS storage comes to mind. There's a lot of things that we're gathering information on, to the point of where we not only gather this information, but we save it off. So you'll see at the end of this, we have an almost 3 megabyte JSON file of all of this information that we've collected. And what we also do with that information is we go and we run a lot of validation checks against the different parts of the cluster. And we generate a report on that as well. And so the really nice thing here is what you end up with, and we'll see this in just a minute as the assessment generator finishes its processing, but you'll get 3 artifacts out of this. You'll get this raw data dump that I was just talking about, this long JSON breakout of all of this information that we're capturing from your cluster. You'll get an ASCII document, which essentially looks really nice in GitHub. So you can store that with your data dump, so you can have a visual or a more human readable representation of the information that's generated. We also generate a PDF, and that PDF is the same report that you can now share with compliance, with audit, with security, with management, the executive team, whomever, right? So let's take a look at these artifacts that are generated. First, we'll take a look at the raw data, right? That almost 3 GB file that I was mentioning. And again, this is just all structured JSON. There's reams and reams and reams of information in here, and it's really not meant for human consumption. Certainly, you can read through it, but it's really meant for tools to be able to pull in this information and then process it, right? And really generate like these reports that we're talking about. So let's look at those real quick. I'll show you the ASCII doc one here in the editor. It doesn't look spectacular. I don't really have a clip showing what it looks like in GitHub. Take my word for it; it looks excellent. But we'll kind of flip over and we'll look at the PDF, and that will kind of give you an idea of what this report actually looks like, right? So this thing did not exist before we ran the assessment generator. So all of this document was created through that process. No human ever touched it. Nobody ever typed a word, right? And we've got a table of contents that is hypertext linked, so we can jump around the document. We can see there's the nodes, here's the namespaces and the pods. So we generate some general reporting on the elements within the cluster that are relevant. And then we go up here, we'll jump down through the table of contents to the cluster operators, and then the real heart of it, which again we've pared down greatly, is the actual assessment results themselves, right? So in this case, we have maybe a page of tasks that we ran for the demonstration. This runs to dozens of pages. We run about 150 checks against your cluster, and it all comes out in this report, right? The cool thing here is this isn't just a one-time process. This is repeatable, and you can do this over and over on a regular basis, archive this information, and now you have an audit trail of exactly what the state of your system was in at any given time. All right. So we're again zooming out further, right? Now that we have some capabilities around automation and management, now we want to integrate with other tools that are specifically built for doing that work for compliance, change management, auditing, all of that. So in this case, we're going to talk about ServiceNow and how we can integrate Tower with ServiceNow in order to give you an end-to-end workflow. Now, the important thing here is, as we step through this next demo, you're going to see that we are running tasks manually out of Tower, right? And generally speaking, we wouldn't ever do that. This would be a fully automated pipeline end to end. The problem with automation, especially when you're doing a demo, is you click the button and you get a green or red check mark, and you have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. So it's hard to show necessarily the value there. So we've broken this up into some steps so that we can see exactly what's going on. But just keep in mind, really the idea here is this is a chained process, right? So this particular demo is going to be focused on the namespace, that testing namespace that we were looking at. And the idea here is that from a compliance perspective, it's mandatory that that namespace exists on the cluster. So we're going to log into both ServiceNow and our Tower instance. So here's ServiceNow. ServiceNow is really cool. They have a developer portal. You can go out there and sign up for a free developer instance, and it basically gives you full access to a ServiceNow platform, right, for development purposes. So really neat. They make that really easy. And then, of course, here we have Tower. This is our lab cluster Tower. So ignore all the red. It's intentional, right? The one thing we want to do in these situations in labs is make things fail. So we have a project this Snow project, right, ServiceNow, and there's two playbooks that are associated with this project, two templates. One is to validate the existence of that namespace, and one is to rectify if it's missing, right? So if we come here and we look at the compliance check playbook project template, I'll get it right. Right now, we just say we have this variable hard-coded for testing, right? So we say we want to go look for this testing namespace. Now, normally we would do this, again, through parameters that are driven from some other source of record. But we're going to run this, and surprisingly enough, nothing happens. So the Ansible play came back and told us everything's fine. So we've technically passed our compliance check at this point, and we've done that because the state of the cluster we left it in, that testing namespace still exists. So having run that playbook, we can run that on a schedule, compliance check, compliance check, compliance check. It'll always come back green as long as that namespace exists, right? So we're going to go and delete it because we're mean users and we want to break things. So we're going to go ahead and delete the namespace, and then we're going to go back and run the compliance check again. And of course, the obvious expected result would be for it to fail, right? And so I think we'll see that. We could just rerun it from the job screen here, but we're going to go back into the templates and run it from here. So you can kind of see the like for like operation. So we run it again, and sure enough, we have a failure. So what happens? We've actually said, oh, we have a failure. Let's create an incident report in ServiceNow. So Tower has now gone and said, well, we failed this check, and opened a ticket in ServiceNow to say we're out of compliance. So if we go back to ServiceNow and we look at our incident reports, and we have that incident 11 there, we can see that this namespace is missing on the cluster. We go in there and we can look at the details. You can put whatever you want in here as far as the automation is concerned to report on the issue. So that's awesome. Now we have a record in ServiceNow of our system being out of compliance. And now we have another template that we can run to ensure that the system returns to compliance, right? And the idea here, hang on. So here we have some user input. We have to tell Tower what the service record is that is associated with this compliance fix, right? Because Tower is going to report back to ServiceNow on that same ticket and say, I have now fixed this issue. So normally this could be automated end to end. We could see that there is an error. We could create the ServiceNow ticket. We could run the immediate remediation, and we can close the ticket. And that can all be done without any manual user intervention. So unlike here, it will be done automatically. And that ticket number that you saw us enter would just be passed through the workflow. But again, in order to demonstrate that, all the kind of things that are going on behind the scenes, it was kind of important to run those jobs manually, right? So the kind of highlight here from compliance and auditing is that Tower becomes your system of truth for changes that are going on in your environment. And there's two fundamental ways to do that. One is obviously Tower keeps all of the information on all of the jobs that were ever run in its database. So you can always go back and see what changed on the system. The other thing is through scheduling, Tower can do config drift management as well. So you can run those compliance checks repeatedly on whatever time frame schedule that you want, and you can force systems to come back into compliance. And then you have a record of that, either just straight in the jobs logs, or if you're using ServiceNow, you can create tickets just like we saw in the previous demo. In addition to that, Tower gives you a lot more capabilities around managing users, giving them access to systems without having to give them credentials, right? So you can share credentials with a user and they can use them in their plays, but they don't know what they are, right? It's kind of like you're handing them a gift wrapped package that'll open the door, but they don't know what's inside the package. So this is a really powerful concept when you want to kind of control access, but you still need to give people the capability to do the work on the systems that they need to do, right? So this is kind of the heart of everything. This is where Tower kind of becomes the centerpiece. I mean, we saw that picture earlier of all the lines of business and they kind of converged into the center. Tower is really the tool that's in the middle of that. So one thing that we've kind of glossed over a little bit, I mentioned it right at the start, but it's very important for really maturing in your environment and getting this right. And that's this idea of GitOps and treating your Ansible playbooks, your infrastructure as code, treating all of that like software developers treat their application code, right? So you want to have source control. You want to check that in. You want to manage those revisions and versioning and all of that. And Tower allows that because it integrates directly with Git repositories. So in the case of doing things properly, you would always pull from your code base in Git for running plays in Tower. And that, again, will allow you to manage the workflows and have a standardized and well-controlled process for doing your automation inside of your environments. And again, one of the big problems that you see in IT operations a lot is, they tend to work off of their own PCs. They have their own scripts, they have their own processes, and it's kind of what they're comfortable doing. And that's great because they're making themselves more efficient, but they're not making anybody else more efficient because it's very difficult to share all of that knowledge that they've dumped into their laptop, right? So having this common resource where multiple engineers can share and work on the same code base, if you will, really facilitates a common understanding. And like I mentioned earlier, is self-documenting. Your process and your automation now become the same thing. And that is extremely valuable from the perspective of, again, making sure you've standardized and everything stays in compliance. So I got ahead of myself a little bit there, but ask yourself this, right? How do you answer the questions that are on this slide? Do you have a good answer today? Does it take more than one tool? How long does it take your team to run through an audit? How grueling is it to pull information? How much transformation has to go through before your audit teams are actually able to consume that information? There's a lot of time and effort spent in this particular use case that really can be improved with, again, something that I consider a little bit outside of the normal path of automation, right? What we normally think of in IT operations as doing automation, right? This collection of information and distribution and retention of facts. And again, Ansible tracks it all, right? We generate this brilliant OpenShift assessment. It has all sorts of great information. It looks nice. It's a good report to, again, hand to the executive team. But the real value is running this again and again against your cluster and having those data sources behind the scenes archived and have your state saved so you can go back and compare and contrast anytime you want to prove that you are in the state that you expect to be. With that, Todd, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Brett. That was really interesting and cool. I really like that use case you showed about around ServiceNow. And remember, this is, drop your use case on top of this, and, we help with the foundation on this. But this comes back to, at this point, you know, that brings us to the question, how do you implement that? Like, you sit there and go, wow, this stuff is cool, and we'd like to get this done, and we're either using Ansible in a different way, or there's some use cases that you thought of, and the answer is Crossvale's prescriptive approach. Ansible Tower Launchpad is how you implement that. So from that standpoint, we have created a simple and repeatable process, to deal with build, configure, and enable, so we can get your team to have the foundation you need to implement Ansible Tower as your center of automation strategy. So all the stuff that Brett was talking about is stuff that we've developed for ourselves and for other organizations, and through the Ansible Tower Launchpad, we implement that in your business. There's no reason that you need to reinvent the wheel. We built an approach that quickly gets your team enabled. You drop your use case on top, and from there, you work the process. So we'll come in and we're going to help you with understanding how to take the use cases, the things that you're looking for to automate, and then how our process and our prescriptive can give you that foundation. So Crossvale's Launchpad has several options to fit your needs, ranging from just a couple weeks, if you see here, like from the standard, through a couple months, if you take a look at kind of the enterprise solution. And we include on-demand maintenance in our solution. So once we come in and actually implement the solution, work with your team, enable your team, help you guys get your use cases going, you actually have access to on-demand resources that understand our approach and know how to continue to support you after we finish the project. So what this does is it helps your team continue to grow in that area of automation so that you can, get where you need to be. So if you have any questions on some of the prescriptive approaches we have, like the standard, foundation, or enterprise, please reach out to Crossvale, and we could get you some additional information on this. But when it really comes down to it, our organization, we can help across many different parts of your organization, whether it's in the IT department, dealing with automating with your ITSM and security, networking, HR, the line of business. There's so many different ways that Ansible Tower and the Crossvale Launchpad can help you launch that automation strategy for your business. So thank you for attending, everybody. We're getting down to the wire here on 45 minutes. Please, there's a survey that is going to be that's going to come out after this. Please fill out the survey so we can help our marketing team understand how to improve on our webinars to have the best content for you. Now we're going to move to our question and answer segment. We have a couple minutes left on here. Let me go over and take a look at some of the questions that we have here. I think we have time for one question. All right, let me see if I can find one that, all right, so Brett, when it comes to the open, or when it comes to the ServiceNow aspect of the integration that we did there, how, I'm trying to reword this question in a way that makes it simple for us to answer. How do we implement that with our Launchpad? Like, how much time does that take for us to go in and get that done? Is I think what they're asking for.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah. And it, like so many answers in IT, it depends. But as you saw, for the case of this demonstration, it literally took me just a couple of hours to do that integration, right? And of course, we've been through this, we understand it and all of that. Now, ServiceNow is, a beast into itself, and there's a lot of complexity going on behind the scenes. We just scratched the surface of, making that connection between the two systems. And a lot of companies have dedicated ServiceNow teams. They have their change management process. They have their CMDB all of those things are tied into the solution. So it really comes down to, you know, how effective is your ServiceNow team, and, you know, how willing are they to kind of move down this automation path, and then, you know, what kind of boundaries are in the way. We gave a very simple example of tying into kind of the REST API of ServiceNow. There are other ways to reach the platform, and depending on the organization and how they're used to interacting with external systems, that could come into play as well. So it ranges, it varies. I mean, it's a great question, and we certainly have seen it all. And we can work through any of those pathways that your company uses in their ServiceNow model.
So it sounds like what you're saying, though, is our Launchpad could come in and build the foundation of what's needed, and then we can customize to help the customer with what their particular use case is. You know, so it's still the same. Launchpad comes in and builds that foundation, and then we just start taking what are you trying to accomplish, and then help you take that use case and run it through that that foundation that's been built. Is that?
Yeah, our integration with Tower is comes right with the foundational elements of that, and then again we extend the service to help you integrate with your particular flavor and design choices of ServiceNow.
Yeah, because it seems like there's no one size fits all when it comes to automation. Everybody has a lot of different things they're trying to accomplish, different types of systems, but there is a foundation that is common across it all, and that's where the Crossvale Launchpad can come in to provide you with that foundational aspect, and then let's put the customization on top of that. So
exactly.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I hope you learned something today. And please reach out to Crossvale if you have any additional questions around automation. We're here experts on this, and love working with the Ansible Tower platform. Thank you.
Thanks all.